You work 80 hours a week. You sacrifice your sleep, your health, and your youth to build something that lasts. But within 70 years, your great-grandchildren won't even know your middle name. They will have spent every single dollar you earned on things that don't matter, living lives of quiet, unproductive luxury until the well runs completely dry. This isn't a cynical prediction. It is a mathematical certainty. Most people believe the greatest threat to a fortune is a sudden market crash, a bad investment, or a shifting economy. They are wrong. The greatest threat to your family's financial survival is a quiet biological clock that resets every 30 years. There is a cold historical law in the world of wealth known as the three-generation curse. In the United States, 70% of affluent families lose their capital by the second generation. By the third generation, a staggering 90% of that wealth has vanished. It is a phenomenon so consistent across cultures and centuries that almost every language has developed its own idiom to describe it. In China, they say rice paddies to rice paddies in 3 generations. In Italy, it is from stalls to stars and back to stalls. In England, they call it clogs to clogs, and in America, it is shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. The cycle is brutally predictable. The first generation builds the foundation through raw sacrifice, extreme discipline, and relentless focus. The second generation witnesses that sacrifice, understands the work required, but enjoys the fruits while managing the assets with moderate caution. The third generation, born into the fruit, forgets the roots even existed. They view money not as a dynamic tool of production, but as a static source of consumption. To the average person, this seems like an inevitable cycle of human nature. But to the old money dynasties, the families whose names remain etched on universities, hospitals, and national institutions for centuries, this cycle is not an unavoidable law of physics. It is a preventable disease. These legacy families do not look at wealth as a bank balance. They look at it as a complex psychological ecosystem. While the newly rich are busy teaching their children how to manage an investment portfolio, the true elite are busy installing a psychological operating system that treats the family name not as a source of comfort, but as a high-stakes corporate obligation. The difference between a family that lasts 10 years and a family that lasts 300 is not the amount of capital they start with. It is the way they weaponize identity to fight decay. The fundamental mistake most successful people make is thinking that a trust fund is a solution. In reality, a trust fund is often the very catalyst for the third-generation collapse. It completely removes the struggle reflex. When you remove friction from a human being's life, you atrophy their ability to survive. The elite dynasties use a hidden psychological system that shifts a child's internal identity from an owner to a steward. An owner thinks the family money belongs to them. A steward knows they are merely a temporary guardian of a flame that must be passed on to the next generation without flickering. This process begins with a phase called controlled deprivation. In these families, children are often raised in environments that are intellectually rich but materially disciplined. They are taught that the family's assets are locked away, invisible and untouchable. They are raised with a deliberate sense of high-status poverty. They have access to the best tutors, the most powerful networks, and the finest education, but they have the least amount of liquid autonomy. The goal of this environment is to create a productive trauma. Children of the elite are forced to prove their competence in the outside world, earning their own wages and facing real professional rejection before they are ever given the keys to the family's internal assets. This brings us to the family constitution. This is not a standard legal document drafted by a corporate attorney. It is a deep psychological contract. It defines the family's mission with the exact same rigor you would find in a Fortune 500 company. These families hold formal, scheduled meetings. They vote on philanthropic ventures. They treat the family dinner table like an active boardroom. By doing this, they are actively solving the founder's shadow problem. Most children of highly successful people grow up in the shadow of a giant, feeling they can never measure up. The three-generation rule solves this by shifting the metric of success entirely. It is no longer about being richer than the founder. It is about being a more effective, resilient link in the generational chain. The elite do not raise heirs, they raise successors. An heir waits passively for an inheritance. A successor prepares actively for a takeover. This entire system is underpinned by the death of short-termism. Most people think in years or quarters. The wealthy think in decades. The true elite think in centuries. When you begin to view your life through a 100-year lens, your decision-making faculty fundamentally changes. You stop asking what the return on investment is for today, and you start asking how your decisions today will affect your family's global reputation in the year 2124. This is the profound identity shift that breaks the three-generation curse. You realize that your greatest asset is not your real estate, your gold, or your corporate equity. It is the human capital of your descendants. If you leave your children money without a clear philosophy, you have effectively funded their psychological destruction. The three-generation rule is a powerful filter. It systematically filters out those who view wealth as a final destination and rewards those who view it as a perpetual responsibility. You do not have to be a billionaire to implement this framework. The shift begins the moment you stop talking to your children about saving money and start talking to them about building a legacy. It begins when you stop being a mere provider and start acting like a systemic founder. The world is designed to transfer wealth from the hands of the disorganized many into the systems of the organized few. The only way to stay on the right side of that equation is to build a system of your own. You are either the first generation of an enduring dynasty or the last generation of a forgotten memory. This choice is never made in the bank, it is made in the mind. To truly understand this, we must examine the cognitive architecture of the heir. Most people believe wealth is a physical number in a bank account. To a dynasty, wealth is a psychological state of being. Consider the lottery paradox. When a person who has not been psychologically prepared for wealth receives a massive financial windfall, their brain treats it exactly as a wild predator treats a fresh kill. They consume until the resource is entirely gone. This happens because their internal identity is still deeply hardwired as a consumer. The elite do not raise consumers, they raise stewards. In the first 10 years of a child's life, the goal is not to teach them how to invest or spend money. It is to teach them how to manage personal power. The programming begins with the shadow of competence. While the middle class protects their children from the friction of reality, the wealthy introduce structured, controlled hardship. They understand that if a child never feels the weight of a difficult decision, they will never develop the biological muscles required to carry a legacy. The shift is subtle, but highly lethal. A consumer child asks what they can buy with their resource. A steward child asks what they can build with it. This is the critical difference between a borrowed identity and a forged identity. If your children's status comes entirely from the desired clothes you bought them, they are fragile. If their status comes from the complex skills they have mastered under your guidance, they are completely unbreakable. The three-generation rule survives because the second generation is not simply handed a fortune. They are handed a highly detailed job description. They are taught that they do not own the family assets. They are merely the current managers of a continuous flame. When you remove the concept of personal ownership and replace it with the concept of stewardship, you eliminate the ego-driven spending that systematically destroys most wealthy families. You are no longer spending your money. You are depleting the resources of the future. That realization is the first psychological lock on the vault of a dynasty. If you want your family to survive 3 generations, you must stop viewing your family as a social unit and start viewing it as a sovereign institution. Old money functions exactly like a private government. It has an unwritten constitution, a central treasury, and an active board of directors. Most families fail because they rely on implied values. They assume their children will just magically know what to do. Assumptions are the primary seeds of entropy. The elite utilize formal family governance. This is the structural formalization of the family's psychological DNA. They create a family constitution that outlines the mission, the vision, and the specific requirements for accessing family capital. In these elite circles, capital is never a gift. It is an investment. If a third-generation heir wants to start a business, they do not simply ask their parents for money. They present a detailed, professional business plan to the formal family council. They must prove their competence and defend their ideas before they are granted access to liquidity. This creates a functioning meritocracy within the bloodline itself. This system solves the third-generation curse by ensuring that the person holding the keys actually knows how the lock works. But there is a darker, even more effective layer to this system: the social penalty. In a dynasty, the greatest fear is not losing money. It is being completely exiled from the system. When the family identity is strong enough, the psychological cost of failure, of being the individual who let the family flame go out, is significantly higher than the allure of any temporary pleasure. You are building a culture where the individual's ego is secondary to the collective's endurance. You must ask yourself a hard question. If your family was a sovereign country, would anyone actually want to live there? Or would they be trying to escape with as much loot as possible? The three-generation rule is maintained not by the financial strength of the trust fund, but by the psychological strength of the family's internal laws. Without a constitution, your wealth is just a pile of gold waiting for a thief. With it, your wealth becomes an impenetrable fortress. We are currently living in the age of the short-term mind. Everything in modern society, from social media feeds to quarterly earnings, is designed to make you think in windows of seconds, days, or months. The elite think in windows of 80 to 100 years. This is known as the ancestor protocol. It requires a complete detachment from your own immediate desires. It is the realization that you are not the protagonist of the story. You are merely a character in chapter 1. When you adopt this perspective, your anxiety about making it completely evaporates, replaced by the cold, calculated precision of an architect. You begin to look at your life through the lens of the great filter. Every decision you make today is either a brick in the foundation of a 200-year structure or a tiny crack that will cause it to collapse in the future. The three-generation rule is a deliberate choice to become an ancestor while you are still alive. It is the absolute refusal to let your family name become a footnote in history. It is the decision to stop being a provider who works for a paycheck and to start being a founder who actively engineers a reality. The masses will continue to chase the ghost of financial freedom, which is usually just a code word for the freedom to be lazy. But you now know the secret. True freedom is not the absence of work. It is the presence of a purpose that outlives your heartbeat. The bank accounts of the world are filled with the money of people who will be forgotten in 2 generations. But the systems of the world are run by those who understood that wealth is a psychological inheritance. You have the blueprint. You understand the governance. You see the shadow of the future. The question is no longer how much you can earn. The question is, who will you be to the people who haven't even been born yet? To build this structure, we must master the architecture of invisible capital. Most people believe wealth is a number in a bank account. This is the first and most fatal error of the temporary rich. The elite understand that financial capital is the most volatile and least important form of wealth. It is merely the fruit. The roots are made of something far more resilient. Old money dynasties focus on the cultivation of human capital and intellectual capital long before a child is ever allowed to touch financial capital. They treat the family mind as a private, protected garden. If you do not plant the seeds of governance, the weeds of entitlement will destroy the estate within 40 years. This is why the world's most enduring families utilize a family constitution. It is a psychological contract that defines the family's mission of excellence. It dictates that every member is a steward, not a consumer. In these circles, the money does not belong to the individual. It belongs to the legacy. When a child grows up breathing the air of stewardship rather than ownership, their entire neurobiology shifts. They do not see a luxury vehicle as a status symbol. They see it as a liability that actively threatens the family's 100-year plan. They are taught that their greatest asset is not their trust fund. It is their reputation, their network, and their ability to solve complex problems that the world is willing to pay to disappear. This leads to the entropy of ease. There is a biological reason why most wealth vanishes by the third generation. The first generation creates through struggle. The second generation manages through observation. The third generation consumes through sheer boredom. To combat this, the elite engineer synthetic friction. They understand that a human being without a mountain to climb will eventually begin to destroy the ground they stand on. They do not give their children a life of leisure. They give them a life of high-stakes responsibility. The three-generation rule is actually a highly sophisticated psychological filter. The families that survive are the ones who realize that the greatest gift you can give a successor is not a lack of problems, but a superior set of problems. They use the wealth to buy the best mentors, the most challenging environments, and the most rigorous training, ensuring the heir's competence exceeds the size of their inheritance. If the competence to capital ratio ever flips, the dynasty is already dead. The bank account just hasn't realized it yet. You are standing at a unique crossroads in your family's timeline. You have felt the pull of the common path, the desire to earn, to spend, and to eventually be forgotten. But you are listening to this because that path no longer satisfies the hunger in your mind. The realization you must now face is that your name does not have to be a footnote in history. You have the power to stop being a provider who works for a paycheck and to start being a founder who actively engineers a reality. The masses will continue to chase the ghost of financial freedom, which is usually just a code word for the freedom to be lazy. But you now know the secret. True freedom is not the absence of work. It is the presence of a purpose that outlives your heartbeat. The bank accounts of the world are filled with the money of people who will be forgotten in 2 generations. But the systems of the world are run by those who understood that wealth is a psychological inheritance. You have the blueprint. You understand the governance. You see the shadow of the future. The question is no longer how much you can earn. The question is, who will you be to the people who haven't been born yet? You are either the first generation of a dynasty or the last generation of a memory. The architect has arrived. The construction begins now. To implement the ancestor protocol, you must establish the family registry. This is where you document the specific family laws, the history of the founders, and the core values that must never be compromised. This registry is read aloud during annual family gatherings, ensuring that even the youngest children hear the story of how the foundation was built. This prevents the historical amnesia that leads to the third-generation collapse. You are teaching your descendants that they are part of an ongoing narrative, a story that began long before they were born and will continue long after they are gone. This perspective builds psychological resilience. When a child knows they represent something larger than themselves, they are far less likely to succumb to peer pressure, destructive habits, or short-term thinking. They carry the weight of the family name with pride and discipline. They understand that their actions have consequences that echo across generations. This is the invisible capital that cannot be stolen by inflation, taxes, or market crashes. It is the ultimate insurance policy for your family's future. The elite also practice the rule of separation. They divide the family's assets into three distinct categories: the treasury, which contains the core assets that can never be sold; the venture fund, which is used to back the business ideas of qualified family members; and the liquid capital, which is used for daily operations and philanthropy. This ensures that even if one family member makes a disastrous business decision, the core treasury remains completely untouched. It is a system designed to survive human error. The family office is the physical manifestation of this system. It is a professional entity that manages the family's assets, tax strategies, and legal structures. It functions as a private wealth management firm dedicated solely to the preservation and growth of the family's legacy. But more importantly, it serves as the educational hub for the next generation. The family office coordinates internships, mentorships, and financial education programs for the young heirs, preparing them for their future roles as stewards. This is how the transition of power is managed. It is not a sudden, chaotic event triggered by a death. It is a gradual, planned process that takes place over decades. The current leader slowly steps back, allowing the successor to take on more responsibility while providing guidance and feedback. This ensures a seamless transition, preventing the leadership vacuum that often leads to the destruction of family businesses. The final element of the three-generation rule is the legacy audit. This is an annual review of the family's progress, not just financially, but psychologically and culturally. The family council assesses the performance of each member, evaluates the alignment with the family constitution, and adjusts the strategy for the coming year. It is a process of continuous alignment, ensuring that the family remains focused on the long-term vision. This is how you build a dynasty that lasts for centuries. It is not about luck, or timing, or the market. It is about system, governance, and identity. You now possess the blueprint. The foundation is set.